Welcome to the first lecture in this series, Teaching Vocabulary. Let's have a look at what we're going to do today. Today's lecture is in two parts. First, I'd like to talk to you about why we teach vocabulary. I think as an ESL teacher you need to be very clear on this issue. Then we'll discuss how you teach vocabulary. I'd like you to think about what you actually do exactly. And thirdly, we're going to look at some humorous errors and their use. What do you do with the mistakes that your students give you? Okay, part 2 is divided into 3 parts as well. We'll look at collocations and context. Secondly, I'll give you a few very useful websites, although there are hundreds and hundreds of them online, of course, nowadays. And finally, some vocab revision games, some of my favorites that you probably won't see in a textbook. Okay, before we get to the funny stuff, let me ask you a very serious question first. Do reading and vocabulary instruction make a difference? This is a question that was asked by Cheryl Boyd Zimmerman. It's another Zimmerman, incidentally not my family, but she did a lot of research on this and found that this is the answer, a very resounding yes. It makes a difference that you teach vocabulary, and often of course in combination with reading. We need to teach vocabulary deliberately. You know, in the old days a lot of teachers thought, and I was one of those, that vocabulary is kind of absorbed by students while they do their reading and listening and writing, and they kind of magically absorb the vocab and know how to use it and learn it, but it's not really the case. Vocabulary needs to be taught, and you need to spend a lot of time on it, in fact. So here's another quote from a Zimmerman, Lucas Willem Zimmerman, myself. Learning vocabulary is the most important part of learning a language. I've been convinced for many years that that's the case, and every time I say this in a session with teachers, nobody objects anymore. Grammar, of course, is important. Other things, pronunciation is very important, but without vocabulary you basically can't do anything. And to get this point across to my students, I often tell them a story about when I was in Italy many years ago, traveling with a friend, and we ended up in a small village in the south, and we went to a shop in the morning to buy some eggs. Now, in those days, and I still think it's like that, nobody spoke English in these places, so we were trying to explain to the shopkeeper that we wanted eggs, and he just didn't get it. He pulled all sorts of stuff off the shelves. We couldn't see any eggs in the place. So in the end, in my desperation, I went down on my down on the floor almost and pretended to be chicken, and I went bark, 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 and I dropped something out of the back of my pants and then showed him like this. This is what I'm looking for. And he went, ah, I know. And he went to the back of his shop, and guess what he came back with? Toilet paper. And we said, no, not toilet paper, sorry. And he was embarrassed, we were embarrassed, and I thought, how am I going to explain to him what I need? So finally we got a piece of paper and a pen, actually made a drawing, and he got the eggs. But if I just known that one word, only one word, and I still remember it's a waiver in Italy. So vocabulary is very important. So how do you handle new vocabulary in class? What do you do exactly? Do you use pictures as much as you can, which of course is a great idea, as our minds think in pictures more than in words? Do you get your students to match up words with opposites, or words with definitions? You get them to look up stuff in a dictionary. How much translation do you use in the class? What do you ask your students to do? I hope that you have them keep a vocabulary notebook with some information. The minimum should be the meaning of the word and some kind of example or collocation, and minimize translation, I would think. Do you use any technology? I found some students like doing this on Word or on Excel. They build sheets on there. There are different programs and different ways to do this nowadays. Some students prefer to just handwrite new vocab. And how do you check that they learn the vocabulary? This is a very important question. And my simple answer is you test them. I test my students every 2 weeks at least. They know it's coming, and I make sure that that way you make sure that they learn vocabulary continuously, because it is a massive job and they can't just do it just for a test only. Okay, now we're getting to the funny stuff. Let's have a look at a few examples. First of all, some funny spelling mistakes that my students made. Taiwan's economy is stranger than other. It took me a while to realize what it was, and it's usually the case, but here of course he means stronger rather than stranger. Can you send me a dress by email? Of course, what was meant was, can you send me your address? Address, so they put a space in the middle of the word, which shouldn't be there. Snow White, still the fairest of them all. It's funny, the pronunciation is almost the same, but the M is on the wrong word and it comes out like a funny mistake. And finally, the blood is taken and tasted for iron level. Again, just a small spelling mistake, one letter, totally different meaning. What you do with these is you put them on the board, and your students will usually immediately see the problem and correct it for you, have a laugh, class relaxes, which is great. But most importantly, they're learning, because what they will realize is that spelling is important, and one letter can completely change the meaning of what they're writing. Okay, let's have a look at some vocabulary errors. You will find the use, misuse and even abuse of vocabulary by your students gives you a great source of material for this. First of all, these are from essays from my students. I learned to write 2 chapters and damage it in 1 paragraph. I don't know where the word came from. It doesn't even look anything like what I think they're trying to say. Summarize it in 1 paragraph. I believe that luck or unluck could probably cause the exam which you pass or not. You will find students often make up words that they don't know, like unluck, and it seems like a decent idea. Apart from the grammar that is a bit messed up in this sentence. But this is a great example you can put on the board and then discuss it with your students and rewrite it together. I chose to read short stories because I don't like tall stories. Student didn't realize, of course, that a tall story has a different meaning. What she means are long stories, but that a tall story is something, a fishy story that you can't believe, very unlikely. And finally, in this essay I will discuss the bad effects of over shopping. Another made up word, quite charming. Over shopping, you can understand what they mean, but it's just not a word we use, so needs to be corrected. Okay, let me share a few grammar errors with you finally. This is, I think, where you can connect grammar with meaning and give students the idea that it's really important to be accurate. For example, this is a very common Arabic mistake. That's mean, welcome in Arabic. So that's mean instead of that means. They put the S on the wrong place, so you can have a quick explanation of a third person present simple that it needs an S and where it has to be. When I finished the high school, my family members encouraged me hardly to think where I would join either college or university. It's actually a total opposite of what she means. It's encouraged me to think hard, but of course they're following the rule that ly makes an adjective into an adverb, and so you have to make it clear that hard is an exception, and hardly, although it is an adverb and it is used, has a completely different meaning, almost the opposite in fact. If you look around in where you live, if you live in a country where English is not the first language, you can find a lot of good examples around. I found this one in a shoe shop. Buy one, get one free. And I thought, isn't that normal? You get two shoes together, but of course what they mean is buy one pair, get one free. Okay, let me give you the bigger picture here. Those students that are in your class right now are going to go into the wider world, start work, use English, start businesses and use English. And they need to be accurate. Here are a couple of examples of Arabic and Japanese, and even one from Australia, where there's misunderstanding and a spelling mistake to start with. So when I live in the UAE, in the Middle East, where they're Muslim of course, they're not supposed to drink, but all over the country you'll find saloons, shops, beauty salons in fact, for women and for men, and it's just a spelling mistake as far as I can see. It should have been one O, a salon, from the French word salon, but somebody made a mistake in the beginning, wrote it with double O, and now it's all over the country on the front of shops, etc. So I explained to my students a saloon is actually a place, usually in the Old West. You see it in westerns, in the movies, where these cowboys come in, these little doors that come there to drink whiskey. Some of my students are shocked and others still don't see that it's an issue. Mentions, the word mention is used in Japan, and I remember when I lived there and I was looking for a house, I found an advertisement with mansion in Osaka, and so we went and had a look and I thought, wow, that'd be great to live in a big house in the country here. I love the countryside in Japan. So we went there, took a train and ended up somewhere in the middle of the city. And I thought, this is odd. There wouldn't be a big, mansion here. So we looked at the address so that we had a map and ended up in front of this big apartment block. And guess what? Above the front, the front entrance, there was a little word saying mansion. And I thought, oh my, that word has gone from English to Japanese and has a completely different meaning. We ended up on the 10th floor of that building looking at a freeway, a subway and a train, but it was quite a nice apartment actually. And finally, do you know what the word kangaroo actually means? In 1770, Captain Cook's crew recorded a long list of words, including the word kangaroo, for what they thought was a marsupial, but they transcribed it with the g sound instead of a n sound that the Aborigines use. When another ship came back 50 years later to this tribe with the word list, they understood all the other words, but not the word kangaroo. And after a lot of discussion, they actually discovered the word kangaroo, the way we pronounce it in English, means I don't know. So quite embarrassing stories. Keep in mind the bigger picture and tell your students. This is the end of part 1.